Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Service Department News webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the new world of business travel, and I have four panelists who would like to talk to you and share their thoughts on what's going on with business travel now and in the future. My name is Felicity Cousins. I've been a business travel journalist for the last 18 years, and I have worked for both consumer and B2B publications. I worked for Business Traveller magazine, and a long time ago, I was editor of Buying Business Travel. I am now working with International Hospitality Media as assistant editor to Service Department News, and I'm really looking forward to this webinar because business travel is a subject close to my heart. So thank you for all joining us. And I just wanted to speak to you a little bit about our sponsors, which are sponsoring this session. We have IMS and also the Corporate Housing Factory. And I've just got a couple of videos to show you if you would like to watch them. And the links for the information to our sponsors will be in the chat on the side of the panel. Thank you.
We are Corporate Housing Factory, your go-to company for booking temporary and extended stays in the Netherlands. Let me tell you what we do. We have about 200 service departments in the Netherlands in all major cities. Big, small, luxurious, minimalistic, modern and cosy. Our apartments are always fully furnished, weekly cleaned, provided with super speed internet, and we can offer an airport pick-up or drop-off too. Now, tell us what type of apartment you're looking for.
Great, thanks so much to our sponsors, IMS and the Corporate Housing Factory. And for more information on those two, you can see the links to information about that in the chat. So I'll just quickly talk through how the webinar works. We'll be talking for around 45 minutes with our panel of experts. And then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. So if you would like, when you're listening to the discussion, to pop a question or two into the chat function or the Q&A function, the Zoom, then we can get to those at the end. And that would be really great. The recording will be made available on email to everyone who's registered, so you'll get that sent in a few days' time. Right, so to get context about what we're talking about, the new world of business travel, I just had a look at a few kind of headlines over the last few weeks. And what you can see is that everyone's had to adapt. So we have Sonder introducing their own GDS code on the GDS so that they can book more easily. So that's a technology innovation that's obviously come along. We have corporate travel doubling in 3 months. So there's obviously some growth and there's some positive news there. We have Situ increasing their extended stay booking process by hooking up with a technology company like Staah. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, so I'll have to ask you, Rebecca, later. If we could move on to the next slide. Yeah, this was interesting actually. So the one-day business trip, is it the death of the one-day business trip? Because obviously with sustainability on everyone's mind, but also cost and value, will we be doing one-day business trips, or is it all down to now the new leisure market where people extend their stays? We've had headlines saying US business travel has returned to pre-pandemic levels. And also Marriott, who's seen an uptick with higher rates expected for next year. Marriott has just launched its Apartments by Marriott Bonvoy. So that's another interesting thing to be able to talk about during the discussion, how the extended stay sector is certainly attracting those big hotel groups. And so this brings me to our panel of experts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them to introduce themselves. And as you see on the screen, I'll go from left to right. So I'll come to you first, Scott. Scott Davies, CEO of ITM. If you could just introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hello, thanks, Felicity. Yes, so I'm Scott and I head up ITM, which is the Institute of Travel Management. We are the professional membership association for business travel professionals. We've got about 5,000 members. And about a quarter of them are buyers, so travel managers, travel buyers, people who organise travel and the travel programs for their companies. And the other 3/4 are the brilliant suppliers who work to support them and provide them with all of their services. So we're just here to educate, inform, connect and inspire the industry. We've been doing it about 70 years. Me personally, not 70, about 5 years I've been doing it. And I'm lucky. It's one of those lucky jobs that you appreciate every day.
Thanks, Scott. That was great. And now on to Rebecca, please.
Thank you, Felicity. My name is Rebecca Gonzaga. I am delighted to say I'm the commercial director for Situ. I am 7 weeks into the role, so this is my first time coming purely into the temporary accommodation space, but I spent the last 20 years in the international relocation and mobility arena. So I've both been a procurer of extended stay accommodation. I am now a supplier of the accommodation, and as an individual, I'm also a user. Clearly, I'm both a business traveller and a leisure traveller. So I'm delighted to be able to be part of the panel today, and Situ is an offering as a global service accommodation provider, particularly focusing in on the extended stay and direct to source market.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Rebecca. And now we're moving on to Carrie Hartman. Oh, Carrie, I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
I will unmute myself and try that again. Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Hartman. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Reside and 360. I've been in the relocation industry just shy of 20 years, which just makes me sound old, but the years creep up. But 360, for anyone that isn't aware, is a global accommodation platform serving relocation and business travel. And we do that by aggregating hotel, apart hotel, service departments, and alternative accommodations globally. I'm very excited to be here and talk about the trends that we all are seeing in this industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. That was great. And last but not least, Fredrik, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you so much. I am Fredrik Raastad, Head of Expansion at Forenom Group, the leading service department provider or operator in the Nordic countries. We've been around for 20 years. I've been with Forenom for the last 6 of them. Very excited to talk about the future trends of our industry. Hopefully I can share some of what we are thinking about and hopefully pick up on some of the thoughts that you have as well. Excited to be here both to share and to learn.
Thanks a lot, Fredrik. That's great. So I'm going to just like lead into the questions, but because it's such a broad kind of subject, obviously the new world of business travel. Why did we choose that? It's because we're in uncharted territory, really. I mean, having worked in business travel for nearly 20 years, I would say I can't remember a time when it just stopped like that. I think I do remember one time when that Icelandic volcano plumed all over Europe, and and business travel stopped, and people were just like, their reaction was huge. And so who would have thought that we could actually adapt to 2 years of no business travel? And we have, and we've survived. So I guess, you know, my first question to the panel, and I think I'll start with Scott, if you don't mind, Scott, is, has business travel bounced back? And if so, which part has bounced back fastest?
It's crazy, isn't it, Felicity? It seems like the time has gone so fast. This time last year, we were still deep in the pandemic, and we weren't really sure what this year, 2022, was going to look like at all. I think I would suggest that demand is back, and it returned back much more quickly than was expected. It almost switched back on like a light switch. I think the infrastructure in certain places is not quite entirely back, and that is throttling the volumes of business travel to some degree. Of course, we can go into that into some more detail. You know, when we talk to corporations in terms of their business travel spend, in this industry, we're very keen on averaging out the whole world, aren't we? Is travel back, yes or no, binary? The truth is that every company is at a different stage, which really is affected by many different factors, including the kind of business travel that they were doing, whether it was visiting clients, servicing their own infrastructure. There's certain industries that never stopped, which is interesting, of course. But in general, many organizations are suggesting that this quarter, fourth quarter of 2022, travel really is back. And some companies are even ahead of where they were in 2019, which is the base that everyone tends to refer to. At ITM, we are the UK and Ireland representative for GBTA, and GBTA's forecasting suggests that globally, business travel will be fully back to 2019 levels only in 2026. But of course, within that, there's pockets and types of travel and sectors of travel that have responded quite differently. So there's never a yes/no answer. I would say demand is back, infrastructure struggling a little bit at times, and I think we're ahead of where most of us thought we would be when we were having these predictions this time last year.
Thanks, Scott. That's really interesting, because I was going to say, I think even though the physical aspect of business travel stopped, behind the scenes, people didn't stop. Companies actually took it as a moment to reflect and maybe kind of reorganize, or like see how they could adapt, didn't they? And I think technology obviously carried on moving forward. So in some ways, although it seemed to stop, it didn't. There was lots going on and lots of talk, and obviously the whole community was always in touch with each other. So thanks for that. What are your thoughts on this, Carrie?
I would echo, you know, what Scott saw. You know, definitely within the service department industry, you know, the nature of you know, letting apartments and having service departments available is, you know, one of the things to speak to the supply chain is that when the demand dropped off so precipitously, a lot of people released their corporate apartments as a way to save money. And so it was almost this just really dramatic boomerang effect, because when travel came back, it came back really fast. And then all of a sudden you have a lot of service apartment companies now trying to scramble to grab new units that they previously had let go to go into, you know, cost mitigation. And so we definitely saw those supply chain issues, the constraints. In the US specifically, there were moratoriums on, the government issued moratoriums on not allowing people, anyone who might have defaulted on their monthly payments for a flat that they were renting, they could not be evicted. And so you also had this natural attrition of people going out of accommodations, which opens up supply for the corporate housing service department industry. Everything just stalled, you know, and it stalled and it stalled and it stalled. And then very slowly, just the demand was much higher than the vacancy. And so, you know, you still today, you know, anyone who, I'm sure any of us that are focused on placing people into London or Dublin or Munich, it's not easy because the compression still exists. And I do believe that that will be a lagging factor, even as, you know, things will kind of level themselves out as we go into what's traditionally a slower travel period into the holidays. But I think we'll still have key cities where supply will continue to demand will outpace supply.
Thanks, Carrie. That's really interesting that it obviously affects different regions and different areas differently, especially with supply and demand. Fredrik, Forenom actually expanded during the pandemic. Is that correct? Am I right in saying that? And what are your thoughts on this?
That's correct. I think Scott, we're onto something here. There were parts of the customer segments that kept on traveling: construction workers, nurses, doctors, those kind of clients. And for Forenom, they've been a key part of our business for a long time. And so we were in a very strong position going into the pandemic, if you could ever say that's something to hold on to. But for us, it was important to keep that focus also during the pandemic, and that enabled us to grow. Going into the future, we still see the same trend, even though we have some new crisis coming in now during 2022. But we still believe in our focus area and in our strategy for the upcoming years. Thanks,
Fredrik. And Rebecca, if you'd like to come in on a point actually that Carrie made about, I mean, over in the US, the government obviously not allowing people to leave. What do you think people in power should be doing to help business travel, during these times, or what could they have done differently, do you think?
I think we can reflect on the period of time, all of us, and come up with things that we might or might not have done differently over that time. I think, in all honesty, everybody tried to do the very best that they could have done in a situation that was extraordinary. And to Fredrik's point, Situ again benefited from the fact that business travel is vast. So that includes the likes of construction workers and people that had to continue working and traveling across border during that time too. So internationally as well as domestically, we saw that there were markets that continued. In terms of being able to get it back up to where it's going, it is about communication and working very closely within our sector. So I think if we're looking about what governments can actually do to help us, they can partner with us and understand what businesses need in order for the businesses to continue growing, which by definition support the fiscal states of all the governments that are meant to be supporting us in the process. So making clear immigration regulations and allowing us to be able to move people into the extended stay and having there be a benefit to it.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Rebecca. I did throw that one at you, so thank you. I've talked a little bit about the recovery of business travel, and I'm breaking this down into three sections just to make the subject matter a bit easier to handle. So we're going to move on to kind of how we've adapted and kind of the resilience of the sector. So I guess what I can ask is what you have learned. What's the biggest lesson you have learned? And I'll start with you again, Rebecca, if that's okay.
You can, and I think it probably comes again back to communication in terms of learning, but also in terms of being able to be adaptable and flexible and moving with the trends in the markets. I think we talked a bit about technology in the opening space and what we need to be able to do there. That's certainly a key trend and something that we're looking at going forward, and the lessons that we're learning as we are in the current state, both from a buyer's perspective, so in terms of the clients that we serve, but also our guest care and our guest stays. They're probably the biggest things that we're looking at.
Thank you. And Scott, in terms of travel management, what's kind of changed and had to adapt? How would you say travel managers have had to adapt to this new world of business travel?
Well, the good thing about travel managers, and I spend a lot of time with travel managers, Felicity, and we try to understand their incredibly difficult jobs from day to day. They are extraordinarily adaptable people anyway. I describe them as the great chameleons. They have to turn their hand and their expertise to all manner of different things all the time. So little old pandemics, no sort of sweat to them in general. But I mean, in all seriousness, they went through various phases in the pandemic. First of all, they were repatriating people, getting them safely home when everything shut down. That was one phase. Then they were trying to understand, how long will this go on for? Everyone became amateur epidemiologists, trying to establish how long these things could actually last for. And then they went into sort of some fairly deep thinking about the value, return on investment on in-person meetings when they would be able to happen. Actually, there was a stage just before that as well, where they became experts in virtual meetings. So all of the technologies that were available, travel managers are just incredible. I like to visualize them as having a big round table in front of them with lots of bits of paper, and that's all the stuff, and only so much can fit. So like everybody in life, they have to sort of relentlessly prioritize. Unfortunately, they have got lots on their table today, which is mainly about the complexities of the return to travel itself. So lots of stuff doesn't quite work as well as it used to. There aren't as many travel options in certain places. But one thing I want to point out, Felicity, is that if they didn't have an appreciation of the service department sector going into the pandemic, they certainly did very quickly into it, because as a couple of the panelists have mentioned, it was the first kind of key sector of travel which actually kept going for them, for all the reasons that people have said. The type of travel that was still going on tended to be project-based, longer stay, and also travel managers and companies liked the more controlled spaces in a service department versus busy lobbies and restaurants in a hotel. So that was a real positive, and that high profile of the service department industry has maintained all the way through, I'm happy to say. So we've got some very strong players in this segment. Have I answered your question there, Felicity? I feel like I've covered.
Yeah, you really have, and actually you've linked it nicely to my next question. But I would just like to bring up a point about travel managers and the service department sector. So I've always wondered when service departments would climb to kind of the top of the travel managers kind of like list, because it's hard for service departments on the GDS. The booking's hard, which is why I talked about Sonder having its own code now. I think it's on Amadeus and sorry, forgive me, I can't remember which other GDS it's on, but maybe Sabre. So I'm always interested in hearing what travel managers think of the whole service department sector, but now business travelers are more aware of the service department sector, what they can, the value it brings, what they can gain, the space they get. They obviously the working from hotel trends that we're having at the moment. So yeah, everything you said was exactly what I wanted to talk about. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think service department is like any great product in that, once people try it once, they really do rather like to stick with it, and they really appreciate it. And it speaks to a couple of objectives that sort of travellers and corporate stakeholders had there, where, of course, you want to keep the travellers happy because that makes them productive and engage staff members. And also, as I know we're going to talk a little bit later on the way that people blend work and leisure trips these days, often service departments can be located within communities that people can then feel temporarily part of, which is really important too. So they tend to be put in places where there's a bit of something to do if you want to, or if you don't want to, you've got your entirely controlled miniature home to base yourself for the duration of that business trip. So I think the way we describe it, during the pandemic, if a travel program is in a race around a track, everyone was in the pits for a while. And when the pits are, when you're having a tyres change, you can address a few other bits and pieces while you're there. The two things they addressed were service departments, and also they took a look generally at their ground programs, which is the slightly less sexy part of business travel and travel program management. But it gave the opportunity for travel buyers to really reset their programs, hit the reset button, and make sure that when recovery came, it was more healthy, and they were able to get compliant, which is the key metric for years has been for travel management.
No, that's great. Thanks a lot, Scott. And so yes, you did move on to my next question, which was, has the service department sector, and I'll put this to Carrie, actually, if that's all right, has the service department sector gained a larger part of the market since the pandemic, would you say?
Yes, short answer would be yes. And Scott did a great job of kind of hitting all the high level points there. But, I think I would say what we experienced was a sort of a refocusing around duty of care from a lot of travel managers, and so if you think about during the pandemic, as he mentioned, the ability to allow for true remote work, but at the same time creating a fully efficient living experience that would keep people, appropriately, whether it be quarantined or staving off some of the concerns or fears, because there was a lot of essential travel that was taking place. The technology industry was another big one that didn't really slow down. I mean, if anything, there were ways to help support people during the pandemic, where a lot of the larger tech companies had essential travel constantly happening through group moves to key areas. And then, and then obviously everything that was transpiring at the very beginning with the Ukraine caused huge swaths of moves to take place independent of, where the pandemic stood. So the ability to anchor around duty of care, the ability for travel managers to focus in on what does safety look like, what does security look like, what does an appropriate cleanliness and precautions really became a cornerstone. And I think those service department partners that were able to convey sort of the way they grounded around that and could provide data, neighborhood data, all the changes with COVID. I mean, all kinds of, I'm kind of going down the tangent of, duty of care was there. I think the way we leveraged technology to get real-time data with all the different changes that were happening, how we could get that in front of clients right away. But I think, to bring it back to the original question, the fact that remote, the ability to give people as much space as you could while they worked remotely, and the fact that they needed to move. I mean, there really was nothing that matched the ability to hand somebody, a fully furnished apartment, because they were there for 30, 60, 90 days and the walls don't close in quite as quickly as they might in a hotel when you're staying for that long.
Sure, thanks, Carrie. I mean, and that sentiment is reflected with the operators, I guess. I mean, I mentioned Marriott launching their apartments by Marriott Bonvoy, but also just apart hotels, and it just seems like there's a lot of kind of growth in that sector, where brands are doing hybrids, and even Waterwalk in the US, they're flexible lodging, they're called now. It's not they're not called service apartments, they're flexible lodging. And I just think there's a lot of interest in the sector. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on just how it's adapted towards that kind of extended stay market?
I can only really echo what Carrie and Scott have said for sure, but what I would do is, from an agent's perspective, our requirement now is to be far more diverse in how we source our supply, where we go, how we source it, if we're in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 locations, how we engage the suppliers, making sure that we've got accommodation that meets all the requirements and the exacting standards, particularly a corporate would expect of us in that serviced accommodation space. But allowing, for example, outdoor living as part of this exercise. We've seen the increased demand for people wanting to have access to a balcony and at least somewhere where they can be outdoors in the event that then they're stuck. Improved Wi-Fi and connectivity. So again, if we look at this from an international perspective, there are locations where Wi-Fi is not an issue. Actually, during lockdown, Wi-Fi was a huge issue for a lot of people because it was unstable. They needed to have additional space to be able to work from home, as well as also have perhaps a cohabiter with them. So making sure that you've got the workstations that are set up within the accommodation. And these, again, were demands both from the guests, but also from the corporate buyers as well. So, and we've seen this, and that wasn't mitigated to any particular industry, that was across the board. So I think that the expectation now on us is to be able to produce creative solutions, but within the governed and the compliant space that we would expect to see from the standard corporate living.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to move on to the third part of the webinar and bring in Fredrik actually for the next question. So we're going to be talking about trends, and which is a nice topic, I always think, because we can have a bit of imagination, can't we, and imagine what things are going to be like in 3 years' time, 3 to 5 years' time. So Fredrik, one of the articles I showed at the beginning was about the one-day business trip and how the death of the one-day business trip, I'd like to say. In the past, we've had low-cost airlines kind of facilitating that kind of, let's just zoom over to Brussels for a day trip. But, with the French government recently actually saying, no, you're not going to have short-haul flights anymore, we're going to catch trains. It does look a little bit like the one-day business trip may be over. What are your thoughts on that, Fredrik?
If they're over, I'm not sure. They're declining, yes. That's a certainty. I see one trend already, and that's just going to be strengthened. We're going to travel less frequently than we have been earlier, but when we travel, we're going to stay for longer. That's the big trend, and I guess we all agree to it. To add on it, and also what's been flowing around in my mind during this discussion is flexibility. Those are perhaps the two biggest trends that I see for the upcoming years. We want to stay for longer, and we need flexibility when we travel. That means better cancellation terms, that means better service selection, etc., etc. So that is the two trends that I see in brief.
Mm-hmm. And so you touched a little bit on the extended, like longer business trips. Would you like to talk a little bit about leisure travel and that trend?
Yeah, it's an interesting trend, and when I've been traveling this year, I can see that I prefer to stay over the weekend or travel on a Friday and then stay in our local office, for example, in Copenhagen last weekend, and then I stayed for a couple of days after. So that flexibility and that luxury of being able to work remotely is an advantage that I think that we should all take seriously and act upon.
Thank you, Fredrik. And Carrie, have you seen that trend? Business travelers staying longer or booking longer?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our average length of stay for our bookings increased by about 20%. Year over year. So the stays are getting longer. I think Fredrik said it perfectly, which is, the frequency, in the face of the economy, as things are tightening up, the demand, we may see, some shifts in that, but the stays are definitely staying longer. And I see a lot of acceptance among our corporate buyers to allow that type of experience for their employees, because this idea of blended travel or leisure travel is a, it's a real thing. And I mean, some of the studies that we looked at and when we've talked to our corporate clients, I mean, they feel, again, creating that type of environment, the amount of productivity and just employee happiness that they're able to get out of those traveling employees is worth creating that type of reality for them. And, I think the other trend that's really going to push, especially the service department industry, in interesting ways is how much technology has advanced over, through the years of COVID. But, historically speaking, unlike the hotel, the hotel industry, the service department industry is pretty disparate, meaning, not everyone has the ability to make their inventory fully accessible, or sometimes there's a resistance to have everything sit on one channel manager for the benefit of corporate buyers. And I think that pressure in that expectation, of, if you look at what Sonder's doing, the reason why that's happening is because corporate buyers want, now that they've had this taste of what service departments can do for their employees, they're going to want it on demand, and they're not going to want just one service to providers options. They're going to want the portfolio, right? I can go onto a GDS platform and see all the hotel options side by side. There's no way that, inevitably, and, why 360 exists is because that is what clients want, right? And so the interesting work will be all of the service department suppliers, finding out the best way to create that experience in concert with each other versus in conflict to each other, which it's that evolution's coming, and it's already here, right? That demand is there, right? If we think about what Airbnb's done for true leisure travel, it's what we're trying to accomplish here is how do we give all the options with the right level of duty of care, with the right level of compliance, that Rebecca spoke to, but you do it in a way where people want to move like this. And the service department industry usually kind of moves a little bit slower. But, so it's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be the largest trend that we see in terms of how technology starts to bring all the disparate solutions together to make things instantaneous, because we are an instant gratification culture, humans, as of this day. So it's an interesting problem to solve.
Thanks, Carrie. I mean, that is interesting, because what does the business traveller actually look like today? And you know, I think over the last 2 years, not only has travel changed, but, you know, people's expectations of travel have changed. So people are maybe not want to put up with certain things, or they're more aware of what they, you know, how they should be looked after. What are your thoughts on that, Rebecca?
Again, the trends that everyone's talked to really can't be denied, and the leisure space for sure is something that I think actually we all take advantage of individually too, me included in this space. But I think we also have an obligation, because it is our field of expertise, to just be reminded and sometimes work with our corporate clients to ensure that, to Carrie's point, they have the right technology to underpin those decisions that they're making to support the employees. Because you have the individuals who are moving, and there's a well-being and benefits perspective, but actually the longer time they spend out of country, the more liable they then can become to break things like tax residencies or compromise their immigration and their purpose for stay. And then that can cause challenges for our corporate clients, for their employers too, but also for the frequency that they can then travel for the purposes of business thereafter. So this integration of technology, perhaps with the wider supply chain too, that underpins our industry is something that we need to consider as we go forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you, Rebecca. That's a really good point. I was actually just going to ask Scott about the digital nomad and whether the digital nomad is here to stay. I can't hear you, Scott, sorry.
Apologies, Felicity. Before I answer that, I just want to pick up that point, because from the point of view of transient travel, Carrie made an important point there, where stays have extended generally in business travel because shorter stay trips are discouraged by corporations, but also because leisure is a growing phenomenon, not a new one, right, but a growing one for sure. But actually, I think that service department providers need to make sure that their products are available on an ad hoc, on-demand basis. I can say myself, I've stayed one night in a service department numerous times over the last year, because it's been the best option for me. So making that available as an option is key. And also, as you talk about, you know, digitization, digital nomads, if you like, the biggest single problem that travel managers are facing right now today is dissatisfaction from travelers and stakeholders with service levels and disruption that their travelers are experiencing out there now. It's not particularly easy to be a business traveler just now. I think those of us that missed it so badly are trying not to complain too much, because this is better than the problem that we had. But any technology or digitization that can do a task which otherwise has to be done by very resource constrained organizations currently, like TMCs, is welcome. So I'm always fond of saying that, yeah, any task in travel that can be automated should be and will be. Equally, any piece of paper that exists in business travel today should be removed and will be. So I think that's a very key trend. And I think that, you know, we've gone from a world, if you remember 10 years ago, people wondered whether phone apps were the way forward, or whether mobile websites were the way. I think we can all see now that phone apps are great, but now we've got 8,000 of them on our phones, and we need to somehow harmonize the world into single versions of the truth. That's really oversimplification of a very complicated ecosystem. I apologize for that. But of course, technology is key. I think this is because, Felicity, the key challenge going forward, if you ask business travelers and particularly travel managers about the future, unfortunately, the future is going to continue to be very uncertain. This sort of chaotic world that we live in today is going to be the norm for the foreseeable future, possibly for a very, very long time, due to economic factors, political factors, war, all sorts of horrible things. The world is going to be difficult for a long time. The providers that are going to do the best are going to be the ones that handle that disruption and that complexity and that uncertainty the best. As I say those words, I feel like that's not helpful because I'm not giving solutions, but I really do believe that, you know, we need to get used to the situation we find ourselves in and the constant disruption. Yeah,
I agree, and I think the important thing to take from that is that we have come through it. So and obviously, as you've all mentioned, you've learned that, you know, a lot from the last 2 years, and you're all sitting here with your, you know, with your success on, really, and going forward, you're talking about trends that are going to happen going forward. It's not like there's no more business travel. It really is still here, and it's just a different new world. It's just the new world we're in.
That's the point, Felicity. I think if anyone needed to be reminded of it, I don't think we did. If we can get through that pandemic and come through it like this, we can do anything. So
exactly.
none of this scares us. There's opportunity out there. It's just, it's going to be pretty bumpy for quite some time.
No, absolutely. That's a good point. And I think we're going to probably close the main discussion soon, but I just wanted to come to Fredrik about that point, about kind of the new kind of business traveller. What does Forenom, or who are you seeing staying with Forenom, and has it changed in terms of what you expect to see in the future from where you're in your expansion plans?
I think that our core customers will remain the same, and that's the corporate traveler, the one traveling for work. Our focus is not on the leisure traveling, and that won't change either. But in our expansion, we focus on geographical reach and expanding in other countries. I'm saying that with a smile on my face, so don't push me too far on that. And we focus on a streamlined user experience. We utilize technology in many aspects, and I'm happy to hear Scott's points here earlier. And it comes from everything from key handling to invoicing. It's part of our everyday operations to improve. And that way we can still, even though it's going to be uncertain, grab our core customers for the future as well.
Great, thanks very much, Fredrik. I'm just going to see if we've got any questions coming in from our listeners, and then I can put them to you. But thanks so far for all of your input. You've all been absolutely fantastic. Yes, I can see a question coming in. How has the cost of air travel affected business travel behaviour? And is it resulting in a reduced number of trips, or are people looking for alternatives like rail travel, etc.? Does anyone want to go for that one?
I'm happy to offer some random thoughts on that, Felicity. You know, airfares have gone up, and actually I'm supportive of the airlines to a degree in that, you know, airlines have taken on massive additional debt during the pandemic. They need to recover, and it's a supply and demand business. So where the demand is there, of course, fares need to be appropriately aligned. What's interesting is that as a regular business traveller, you thought you knew the way airfares worked before the pandemic. They kind of were cheap a long way out, and then they got very expensive. Some of that logic no longer applies. It's a new world of revenue management in all sectors. And so some of the pricing is pretty surprising. What we find is that across the whole ecosystem of business travel, costs are up. And what that means in the end is that if your budget is the budget you were given in 2019, you are not going to be able to travel as much because you know, costs are that much higher. What that means is that less trips, probably less people from each organization traveling on the trip. It's here to stay for some time, you would think. There are other factors that will come into this, like paying for sustainable aviation fuel, which comes at a premium. So air travel is not likely to get cheap anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. It's a good answer to be put on the spot like that. What about in terms of sustainable travel? Should we be traveling at all?
Easy, yes.
Because face-to-face, there's nothing like face-to-face.
100%. You know, if the pandemic taught us various different things, it reminded everybody of the power of face-to-face over virtual. There is nothing like it. It cannot be replaced. Of course, we learned some of the things where if we were over traveling before, we've learned some tricks of the trade to replace some of that and get more people involved in the meeting by having virtual options. But face-to-face travel is essential. And this comes back to your question about government support. We need governments around the world to understand the value to prosperity of business travel. Controversial thought, Felicity. There are some people who believe some of the tensions in the world may not exist if people were able to spend more time together. You know, we've had 2 years without being together. That makes disconnects happen.
No, yeah, it's not controversial. I think it's quite prudent. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? And one we can all definitely think about. I've got another question that's come in. I'll put this to Carrie. Are business travelers becoming more autonomous like booking their own accommodation rather than going through travel buyers and TMCs? I mean, any one of you could answer, but I'll go to Carrie first.
I think I'll tell you how I interpret that question, and hopefully I succeed in answering this for the person. Is I think you have to start with the corporate company itself and their culture and what they're looking to achieve. And so I say it that way because, for example, we have corporate clients where that is 100% yes. The answer is yes, but that's their culture, right? They want to set parameters, service level agreements and business rules, share their travel policy, but the end result, like their perfect world, would be I as a traveler, I as an employee should be able to go to one location, use one single sign-on, access my TMC experience, my RMC experience, my accommodation platform experience, and the whole thing should be autonomous but controlled by the governance of the travel policies. And so, as I mentioned before, that pressure of especially the larger, if you think about it, some of these larger tech companies, right? Again, they offer the world the ability to self-review, self-select, self-purchase, do all of these things and on demand. And so a lot of their ask is, when is the travel industry going to coalesce in a way to sort of give back to us what we give the world? And so the answer is yes. But on the flip side, there's also, and we're used to it as well, right? Again, I love the mention of, I was just laughing as Scott mentioned how I personally have probably 7,000 apps on my phone. I don't even know what I have on there anymore. So it's, so is there a way to make this simpler and easier for the end user? But the short answer is yes. And then I say on the flip side, the reason why I say it's corporate culture that demands it is there's also really large corporate companies that don't want that, right? They want the hand-holding and the personalization, and they want things to be consultative. And so the answer is yes and no, but it really comes back to the experience that mobility program, that corporate client is wanting to deliver for their employees. And the pressure on all of us is delivering both, right? Setting the value with, obviously the consultative side, but the people that truly embrace the idea of a digital nomad, that want pure end-to-end digitization, that is absolutely something that many, many clients ask for and expect.
That's really interesting. It's interesting you're saying that really it would be good if those two thoughts could merge or meet in the middle somewhere. What do you think, Rebecca? Is there a way where people can have automation, but also be within like compliance and what their company wants them to be doing?
Yes, but I also think this is where the human element comes into play. So, for example, if I think about the way Situ is looking to address this going forward, we have a B2C platform as well as a B2B element. So guests can book directly through us, but we also then have the ability to manage the corporate piece, of course. And what we need to be able to do, and what we're doing, is measuring the data when we have bookers coming in directly to us or guests coming directly to book to us, and being able to report that back to clients so that we can identify when people are doing that. And if we look at that systemically, there's a mistrust in the supply chain. And to go back to Scott's perspective and the point that you raised, Scott, around the cost, so actually the budgets haven't changed for T&E, so people are now being more conservative about how they travel. If they're getting certain rates coming through their corporate travel team, and they believe that they can do that themselves cheaper, particularly as cost center owners, that's where we're seeing them going direct to source and trying to find solutions themselves, but not also understanding what they're buying. So if we look at the leisure space and the vacation rentals, actually those landlords can't do the registrations for immigration, for example, that you might need to have for a 30 or 60 or 90-day stay in certain countries. So there are things there that people are trying to buy without understanding where the costs are always coming from. So I think again, it's incumbent upon us as a supply chain to be transparent with the offering that we take to the market, where the costs are very clearly understood, and that within the policies, the reasons for the policies that HR will have and travel divisions will have are clearly explained and accessible by the ultimate employee, and that will help.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rebecca. Thank you. It's a good way of explaining it. And one of the next questions is actually about online travel agents, and are the major online travel agents making inroads into business travel markets since the pandemic, as opposed to just leisure? Who would like to answer that? Fredrik, would you like to have a go?
Yeah, sure. And they have been, and they have even before the pandemic. We've seen a trend. What they have done better than us, if we mention Airbnb or Booking.com, they've sort of managed to centralize and set guidelines that and an expectancy level that we can all agree upon, whether it's in Amsterdam or it's in Copenhagen or Oslo or whatever. Whereas the service department industry still struggle with this. We can start with the names, where sometimes it's apart hotel, sometimes it's service departments, sometimes it's corporate housing, and they've utilized that, and that's enabling them to take a share of the market in the upcoming years as well, if we don't handle this standardization problem that we're facing.
Do you have a good word for one word then for that sector? Because everyone's got a different way of describing it. We even have hotels now in the UK.
I propose service department. Let's call it what it is.
Okay. How about you, Scott? Do we need one name, or can we all manage all these different names?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask about naming stuff, but I think, you know, on this point about, you know, going direct and with online travel agents, candidly, I haven't seen any data recently that indicates that that business is going towards online travel agents. Pricing is always important to avoid leakage from travel program, which is what we call it in travel management world. But, you know, at ITM, we would always strongly recommend working with an expert partner, whether it be a service department specialist or a TMC. You know, that's what we strongly recommend. Back in the days before, you know, the apps had a decent handle on disruption and rebooking and those kind of movements. Direct bookings really came unstuck when there was disruption, because suddenly providers had lots of travelers on their hands without much ability to manage them. That wasn't their stock in trade. And that's when the TMCs and agents really showed their value. And I think, yeah, to a large degree that still applies. The difficulty we've got in the industry right now is that some of the agencies are struggling for staff. And that sometimes is making people think I might be better off going direct, which is something that we need to be mindful of.
Interesting. Thank you, Scott. I think we're going to pretty much wrap it up there, unless anyone feels like they have the urge to say anything else on those two last questions. Does anyone feel like they've got something that they really wanted to say that I didn't touch upon in this discussion? No, good. Is my job done? Thank you. Thanks to the panel. That was fantastic. It was so good to hear your thoughts, and I really appreciate you coming on. And Rebecca, I really appreciate you getting up at 4:45 a.m. No, sorry, Carrie. Sorry, Carrie, for getting up. And I'm glad the coffee worked. So thanks very much. I just wanted to flag up our next webinar, actually, which is on ESG, walking the walk. So that's going to be a great discussion on sustainability, and also on looking after the well-being of travellers and just general kind of governance around that. You can actually look in the chat, and there's a link there that you can register for that going forwards. It's on the 24th of November. And I would also just like to flag up our Recharge event. It's an in-person event, which, as we know, face-to-face, nothing like it, in Lisbon this year. It's next year, sorry, 23rd to the 24th of January. The details for that will also be in the chat. So please have a look at that for more information, because that's going to be a really great event with some great discussions and topics talked about. And finally, I just wanted to say that if you'd like to work with us on anything or find out any more information about what we do, then please contact my colleague Katie, whose details are also in the chat. And it'll be great to hear from you if you've got any questions about what we do and how we do it. And that actually leaves me to say thank you very much to our sponsors, IMS and the Corporate Housing Factory. And thank you to our panelists. And yeah, have a great day and hopefully see you again soon.